Hello everyone. Welcome to the webinar on GCP Cloud Big Picture. This session is about if you're a beginner on Google Cloud, is the best thing to get started. So we are cloud enabled with Singapore, India, and US office. So currently we are into emerging technology training programs from last 7 years, and we have been adding portfolio. At this moment, we are offering public cloud trainings, which is on AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud, which is all the tracks like architect, system operations, developer, networking, and security specialties. We also do microservices development training where you can develop your own microservice, expose it via API, and then deploy it on Kubernetes. The third portfolio is machine learning, where we have two types of models: train your own model using TensorFlow, and also train model on AWS, Azure, and Google Machine Learning. And the fourth is DevOps portfolio, literally everything which is widely deployed in the industry. We cover 90% of the tool set in terms of installation, configuration, and setting up a pipeline. So that's about me. I'm Anil Bidri, CEO for Cloud Enablers for all the three companies worldwide. I've spent 15 years in IT industry and one of the 25 global experts for OpenStack who helped them to develop OpenStack certification. I'm also one of the 252 Google certified inspectors worldwide. I've been awarded on national television on Data Center Summit Awards, featured on NDTV, and I have several projects done, which is listed on your screen right now. But yes, I deliver cloud, DevOps, and machine learning areas. So the agenda for the day would be we look at Google regions, which means when you want to spin up a VM, which all geographical regions you can spin up. Look at compute service. This is where you can run your application. We have storage service. When you run your app on a application on compute engine, but you have to store the static data elsewhere, right? The persistent data. You have some storage options to store your file data. And we have databases where you can store your persistent requirements of your application. And we'll also look at Google Network Services. We have a short demo where we'll deploy a load balancer, deploy application, expose it behind load balancer, and then access it via the internet using a domain name. So currently, Google is available in 22 regions. A region means this is number of countries where they have their physical presence, as in the data centers. And they have a concept of zones. If you notice, there are 22 regions and 67 zones. What does it mean is each region has at least 3 zones, which is nothing but 3 physical data centers. Let's say Singapore as a region is one region. It has 3 physical zones, which is 3 physical data centers. And we have network edge location for caching the data. And currently it's available in 200 plus countries and territories to do business. There are few new data centers coming up like Las Vegas, Jakarta, and many more. This is one of the old charts, but essentially gives you an idea. If you see 3 there for Sao Paulo, that means you have 3 ability zones. And Mumbai, India is 3 again. So essentially you see at least 3 data centers in every region. A quick summary. What is a region? It's basically a geographical location where you'll see a Google data center. And what is availability zone? It's basically an isolated location within the same region, which means if Singapore is a region, we talk about AZs are nothing but data center within Singapore. So what is necessary? So let's say you have 3 web servers to be created and be available in Singapore for data location issue, right? You can spin up web 1 in zone A, web 2 in zone B, and web 3 in zone C. So essentially, if even if 2 zone goes down, which is 2 data center down, your application is still running. And you can place this 3 web servers behind a load balancer. And load balancer is available for a regional service, which means even if 2 AZ goes down, your load balancer is still running. That's how you provide the high availability. So let's look at compute service. So I designed it in a phased manner so that we take from ground up to production. So essentially, compute service means this is where you can run your application. Let's say you are a competition to Expedia.com or you're a competition to eBay.com. Let's say we say cloud-enabled e-commerce.com, right? You want to compete with some other e-commerce company. In that case, your e-commerce application would run on any one of these compute services. There are 4 options for you. The first one is Google Compute Engine. Essentially, it is a virtual machine as a service, which means you can create a virtual machine on Google Cloud, which comes with pre-installed operating system like Windows Server Edition and Linux operating systems. So within Linux, you have Red Hat Linux, Ubuntu, SUSE Linux, CentOS, Debian Linuxes, and others. Windows, you got from all the way 2016, 2019, you have 2012, and many more. So when you spin up a VM, they charge you based on per minute, change for per second. Essentially, if you spin up a VM for, let's say, more than 1 minute, 25 seconds, you only pay for that amount of compute cycles. And within that, we have 3 categories. On demand, which means we don't have any agreement with you. Essentially, you spin up a VM, use it for 10 minutes, you pay for 10 minutes. We have on demand, for example, $1 per VM per hour, right? So if you go with reserved, which is nothing but when you commit something with us, we actually give you more discount. Preemptible is basically nothing but when you have a virtual machine requirement, which you have to run for, let's say, 24 hours, right? And you have big data kind of cluster where within 20 hours, you can finish your job. So essentially, preemptible are nothing but it's claimed to be running for 24 hours for you. And after 24 hours, the VMs will be deleted. But the advantage is you get up to 80% discount, right? So if it's a $1 per VM per hour, which is on demand, this will cost you less 80% for it. Another thing, when you spin up a VM, assuming your e-commerce.com needs a CPU of 18 plus 64 gigs of RAM, right? So essentially, it's a instance type where you can configure different vCPU and RAM based on your application needs. This is pure play infrastructure as a service, and Windows and license for Linux is bundled already. However, let's say you spin up a Windows Service Pack 1, which is 2016 today, and then the Service Pack 2 comes up or anything else comes up. The updates to those VMs, the guest operating system, is your responsibility. The second option is you can run your app on Google App Engine. If you want to take your laziness to next level, right? This is the best solution today to run the apps. It's basically a platform as a service, which means you don't have machines to spin up or patch the machines. All that you do is take your application, give it to Google, and forget everything. What Google will do is Google will take your application, containerize it, run it on containers, deploy multiple containers for high availability, create a load balancer, create a DNS name and map that DNS name to the load balancer. And when you have more hits, let's say you're doing a mega sale worldwide, you got billions of users, right? Automatically, Google App Engine will add millions of containers for you. But after the big billion day, your requests are coming down, it will also scale in. And this is all automatically done. Unlike in VM, you set up auto scaling policy like spin up 100 VMs, maintain them as it is. If there's a spike, go up to 1000 VMs, right? And you scale down policies and everything. Here, nothing to be done. So automatically taken care by Google on this area. It's pay per use, number of instances, and it scales load balancers and containers automatically. Even the load balancer performance scaling is taken care by Google. And don't have to specify how many instances you need, right? But essentially, if you are a developer company, Google App Engine is best for you where you don't have infra team. Let your developers develop your code, commit on GitHub, and push it to these guys with the app package and everything taken care. Or you can bring your own Docker image if you have already on your environment. Give that image to Google App Engine and they'll run it for you. The third option is Kubernetes as a service. So basically, the service is called as Google Kubernetes Engine. It's again powered by containers, which means they use containers behind the scenes. here you have opportunity for bringing your own image. And just be clear that this is not platform as a service. Imagine it's almost like an infra as a service, because you bring your Docker image, which is like a VM template in your virtual machine world, and that image should have everything to run your application. What Kubernetes Engine will do is take your image and run it for you based on how many containers you want. Do you want a load balancer? Everything taken care by Kubernetes. But you have to specify what you need. Suppose Docker images, very ideal for web application which are stateless. And essentially, if you have microservices, like if you look at ecommerce.com, login is a microservice. You can deploy 100 containers for it, right? Then you have cart ID, maybe you need 2000 containers. So you can have different microservices with different number of replicas, which can be deployed on Kubernetes. Now, for some reason, if the host goes down, Kubernetes engine sees, okay, the client asked for 2000 containers for the cart ID, but however, one machine down, 100 containers are missing. It will recreate 100 containers elsewhere for you in the cluster. So it does self-healing. Plus, Kubernetes engine also does exactly like VM autoscaling do. You can specify that I want 2000 containers for cart ID at any given time. If there's a spike, I want it to scale up to 3000 containers. You can set up auto scaling for the containers now instead of virtual machine, which you used to do it old school days. The fourth one is cloud functions, but this is not necessarily where you run your apps. Like if you are ebay.com, you won't be using cloud function to run ebay.com there. Essentially, this is a serverless architecture and event based. If you're an IoT company, right? So essentially, if there's any data points which comes to you, and only then you want some application to run and do some work on it. For example, you have a wristband which is taking the health monitoring of a person, right? And you get a heart rate which is beyond expected. So then an event is triggered. Only then the server will kick in, and servers basically last for 15 minutes. And within 15 minutes, it will run your function. The function is what you write. It is basically app.py, for example. They will run the function for you. Probably you want to notify your caretaker and the doctor saying, okay, the heart rate of this person went high. Why don't you reach out to this person, right? So basically, this is more of event based and not like running your host applications which you do today in traditional world. Yeah, so mostly IoT backends, and there are many other use cases. Just a webinar. Cloud function itself can be a one-day training alone. All right, so shifting the gears. Now we know where we can run our ebay.com kind of application, right? E-commerce app, which is cloud-enabled e-commerce.com. You can run it on Compute Engine, Kubernetes Engine, or App Engine. But when you have a load balancer, the request is going to land to many of the different VMs, right? So what if the VM gets deleted? That's where we need to store our data on a storage system. So one of them is persistent disk. Basically, it's a persistent volume, which means you can create a raw disk and attach to your VMs. So what does it do? It's basically the service is available only for your compute engine and Kubernetes engine, where the disk can be attached to Docker host in your Kubernetes, or a disk can be attached to your virtual machine in compute engine. Essentially, attach this raw disk and then format it using ext3 or ext4 for Linux. If Windows, you can format using NTFS. In simple words, Google Persistent Disk is D drive for your virtual machine and nothing more than that. So what's the advantage here? When you store your data on D drive and somebody accidentally delete your VM, so all that you lost is virtual machine, which is the C drive, which is program files and application running on it. You already have a VM template. You can launch VM number 2, attach the same D drive back to VM 2, and you can do a recovery. So essentially, we do not recommend you store your data on the C drive. You can store it on D drive, because D drives are nothing but independent of your VM deletion. Yeah. So summary, as discussed, you can attach the volumes to either Windows machine or Linux machine. So based on the OS, you format the raw disk. The way things work on the pricing here, it's per GB per month, basis on amount of GB of data you provision. And you have two options: SSD for high performance and SATA drive, which is standard disk. Essentially, we don't have documentation, it's a SATA drive, but we just call it standard, which is less than your SSD performance. So the second thing is when you run e-commerce application, right? You have HTML, CSS files, you got your videos. Let's say on Netflix, so all your videos, right? The images of the movie tray, pictures of the particular movie which you're releasing. So all of that cannot be stored on persistent disk, because if I have 1000 VMs and Netflix has to store every movie on every disk of each VM. The reason is the load balancer might send the request to VM number 25, and 25 should have the disk which is having the movie which a person wants to stream, right? So that's not quite possible. So the idea is keep your application stateless and keep your data, which is on object-based storage, very good for storing files. So what happens now, you have 1000 virtual machines, only C drive and no persistent disk. So the 1000 VMs will run Netflix.com, and movies, let's say Avengers.movie, it will be stored on the cloud storage. Now it doesn't matter your request goes to VM 25, VM 20, or VM 100. So all of them have just hyperlinked to that particular file, which is on the storage, which is single, and then stream onto the screen of the user. So the pricing is per GB per month, and literally it's unlimited storage. I'll be surprised if Google come back and tell you we don't have more storage, don't come back to us, right? So basically, object storage are designed for ultimate scale. You can bring all the data you have and happily store them here. Coming to Google Network Service. So we have load balancer. So you saw that Compute Engine has virtual machine as a service. So let's say you have Netflix.com and you run this on 1000 VMs on Compute Engine, right? So that's your apps, and the Netflix.com movie files are going to the cloud storage. But how about, can I give IP address of each VM to the end customers that go to this IP and go and browse Netflix, right? You have 1000 IPs to publish, and it's not a best practice. Nobody remembers IP address, right? And we need a single IP. So that's where Elastic Load Balancer as a service comes into play. It's a software load balancer as a service. It's regional plus multi-region. So there's a global load balancer as well, which means regional here means in Singapore, you have 300 VMs per zone, which is 900 virtual machine. And then you have a single load balancer, which can send traffic to all the 900 virtual machines. That's called as regional. Now, what is global here? We have 300 VMs in Singapore region, 300 in Sydney, 300 in Mumbai, and 300 in US, and then 300 in Europe. So we have multiple regions where the virtual machines are created. And if you want a single global load balancer and send the traffic to all these guys, we can do that. That's called as global load balancer. The only catch is you should have your application listening on port 80 or 443, which is SSL, or port 8080. That's for the global load balancer. And this will just balance the traffic across your Google instances. When you hit the load balancer IP, let's say 1.100, it will take care of sending it to 1.20 or 1.12, 1.15 or 1.50 on the backend. So it supports two kinds of protocols. One is round robin, another is stickiness. So round robin here means if you hit the load balancer IP 1.100, request A will go to, let's say, VM number 10, and request P will go to VM number 11, request C goes to VM number 12. So basically it does a round robin fashion. Stickiness here, user request came in and went to web 1. Now all the subsequent clicks he's going to do will be all served from web 1 again. So that's called as stickiness. Now everything is good. Now we have a load balancer where people are hitting, and we have thousands of VMs serving the traffic, and my movie files are stored on the cloud storage, but we still have a problem. Still, a load balancer is an IP address. Will you be able to give a client 54.20.20.10 as an IP address to access your website? Cannot, right? That's where we have one more service, which is this is the architecture of how things look like. So users are going to hit internet, then hit the load balancer, and the load balancer sends traffic to the VMs on the backend. But here the load balancer still has a IP address. So how many of you remember IP address or the domain name, right? So we all know netflix.com, but how many of know load balancer IP address behind the scenes? Or we don't need to, or neither they expose it for you, right? So that's where we have cloud DNS. So basically it's a public DNS as a service, which means you can have your domain purchased from GoDaddy or any provider and then host it on Google Cloud DNS. One, it's a global service, which means whenever you're running your application, let's say you're hosting your apps on Singapore region with a regional load balancer, your DNS is actually global, which means the service would be running globally. It can send traffic to your Singapore load balancer. So tomorrow Singapore goes down, no worries. You can spin up your app in US and then use the same DNS and send traffic to that particular load balancer running in USA. It can route traffic to your load balancer and then load balancer will send the traffic to your virtual machine. Or you have a small startup. So maybe you're running a single virtual machine and hosted your application and you want a domain name for it, not a problem. So Cloud DNS, you can just create like myecommerce.com and then traffic sent to the IP address of single VM. That's also possible. So this is an architecture. So essentially users will hit internet and then come to the Cloud DNS. And the Cloud DNS, you host your domain, thecloudenable.com. And when people hit this on the web browser, we can add a record set. I'll be doing a demo of this right now. And that will go to the Google load balancer. And the load balancer will send traffic to VM1, 2, 3, or 4, which are across different zones. If this is a global load balancer, which is it is in this diagram. So Web1 can be in Singapore, Web2 in Sydney, Web3 in Mumbai, Web4 elsewhere. Now, virtual private cloud. So imagine today's world where you have the best of the systems, you purchase the server, the storage, right? If you do not have a network, how do they communicate with each other? The network is a very critical component in your physical world. In Google as well, there's a concept of virtual private cloud, which is nothing but a custom network. Let's say you have a network in your office, which is 172.17.0.0/16. And now you want to do a hybrid cloud with Google. On Google, you can create a 192.168.0.0/16, which is a different subnet. And then you can do a hybrid cloud VPN between your cloud and the Google Cloud. So essentially, custom networks will avoid conflict of IP, and you can create your own network as you choose. It's an isolated network in Google. What does it mean is, let's say customer A creates a VPC and he creates a VM in that VPC. Customer B creates another VPC, which is of exact same subnet and launches a VM in his VPC. So both of the VMs cannot talk to each other because they isolated at the virtual network level. And every customer can today have a same subnet on Google without IP conflict, without having access to each other VM. That's the magic what VPC does. So in other words, if you want to do, let's say, peering in some days, right? For example, let's say Cloud Enabled acquired a different company and the company is also using a VPC, right? So Cloud Enabled has a VPC, which has 192.168. And the company I acquired probably has a VPC, which is 172 network. I can just do a peering between both the VPCs across organizations. instead of migrating all the VMs to my cloud VPC. So that's the ease of use when you do a networking in Google. And the best part, very unique proposition of Google is the networks are global, which means when you do a one click, a network will be created across 22 countries. A single click will create you a network of 22 countries, which is global. And then a subnet in each region. So there'll be 22 subnets, one subnet 192.168, for example, in Singapore, another subnet of 122 in Sydney, right? So you'll have one subnet per region, which is created across the globe in one click, right? So that's an amazing solution and takes around 90 seconds to create a global network today on Google. So coming to the last leg of the session on the theory part before we jump into demo. So essentially Google database service. So we talk about Netflix.com, right? So where you have the movie files going on cloud storage, application runs on compute engine, right? And you have load balancer and DNS. But how about when people click on login, it does ask you for username password, right? So to store your username passwords, we need a different kind of solution, which is database, not a storage. So under that, we have Cloud SQL. So basically, Cloud SQL is good for OLTP. It's a RDBMS. Sorry. It's a managed database service. So you get essentially Microsoft SQL, PostgreSQL, and MySQL Enterprise. So what happens in these three cases is you can use any of these database and Google will take care of running the database for you in a managed fashion. So you don't have to install database, neither patch them or upgrade them. It all comes with license bundle. No need to buy your licenses. And if you want to do some reporting, let's say you have SQL server running where all your banking transactions are coming in, right? And you want to run some reporting on it. So what you do is you create a read replica of your primary database, and then you point your reporting to the read replica. So that will help your performance on the read side. So why should you look at Google Cloud SQL? One, when you use Cloud SQL, you don't have to launch an instance. Example, you can always create a VM in Compute Engine, SSH, download Cloud SQL, right? So for example, MySQL, download PostgreSQL, right? And install it. But in that case, you have to launch an instance and install the SQL database. So that's where you have to install and manage your database servers, right? But in case of Cloud SQL, they come with pre-installed Cloud SQL into it, which is MySQL, PostgreSQL, and Microsoft SQL database. Currently, there's no Oracle on Cloud SQL. If you want Oracle database, you have to go the old school days. You have to spin up a virtual machine in Compute Engine, SSH or RDP if it's Windows, download Oracle and install Oracle on each VM. But you are responsible for applying the license key. You are responsible for self-support along with your provider like Oracle. So another good news is you don't have to set up replication, right? So if you go Compute Engine, VM1, install MySQL. What if that VM1 goes down, right? So in order to do that, you always create VM2, install MySQL, and set up a replication between VM1 and VM2. So those things also you don't have to do because essentially Google will deploy two database servers and then set up a replication automatically. And your app is running on, let's say, Compute Engine. It is sending the request to 1.100. Behind the scenes, there'll be database 1, 1.10 IP, database 2, which is 1.20 IP. So if 1.10 goes down, automatically they'll route the traffic to 1.20. So you don't have to change anything on your app configuration. Another good news is you don't need infra team. Essentially, the database version is all managed by Google. Upgrading your operating system, patching them, vulnerability fixes, everything taken care by Google today. So this is good for your username passwords or you're doing some OLTP like payment, right? So you have a payment model on e-commerce, which will track your payments and everything. That is good for that. purpose. We also have Google Firestore. This is NoSQL. Imagine your e-commerce company, right? Today, when you sell a product like mobile phone, it has 10 attributes like color, size, location, whatsoever, right? So it is good. And tomorrow you want to sell aeroplane. Now, aeroplane, we have 256 attributes, right? So it will not be just 10 when you go and buy a product. You will look at more and more details. So if you're an e-commerce company and using Cloud SQL for storing your catalog information like product A attributes and product B attributes. In typical SQL, if you have product A with 10 attributes and you want to add a new product of 256 attributes, you have to alter the table. What does it mean? It will call for a downtime. And imagine you are adding 1 million products a day, and every time you have to alter table, what will be the experience of the end users? So basically, that's where NoSQL comes into play. So if you're an e-commerce company, your e-commerce company will use username, password, which is login info, plus it will also use your payment, which is OLTP on the Cloud SQL. But the catalog information, which is the product you add to cart, the cart ID information. So all of this can go to a NoSQL. The reason being, NoSQL is fully managed database service, plus it is schema-less. So what happens here is product A, when you add 10 attributes, it's fine. You can add product B on the fly without downtime with 25 attributes, for example. That's a good news about Firestore. And again, don't have to worry. It automatically scales your performance. Let's say you add 1,000,000 products today and tomorrow a trillion products, right? Don't have to worry about database performance. It's all taken care by Google on the back end. So use cases, real-time bidding apps, recommendation engines, right? Like people who bought this also bought this, you see on e-commerce. Gaming stage, so people who left the game, the last stage, right? Certainly they can pick up from there. IoT device information. So basically IoT will take what, right? So your projector, for example, the state of projector is on or off. It's just a key value pair, right? Don't want to store more. So that's where you can look at Firestore in that example. Microservices data storage. So basically you are running your microservice of login, right? So that can go on SQL, but you are running a cart ID microservice. It can store the data on the NoSQL. So now this is all great, but there's one thing which is missing in the entire architecture is, let's assume that we have 1,000 virtual machines and customer hit the DNS. It went to load balancer and the request from there went to VM number 20. Now user is filling up a form that I need this product, cart ID, everything, and he is about to click on pay now. Before he clicks on pay now, he has given his reference address where to deliver, and the virtual machine failed. Literally got deleted by accidentally by someone, for example. Imagine the situation here. The customer has to experience two things. He has to refresh browser. He'll get the website again because again his DNS request goes to load balancer. Load balancer sends to VM number 50. But VM 50 won't have information about the last things what he has done. Just again start filling up form, add product to cart and everything. So essentially your application should be stateless and the state of your app should go on memory store. This is a great solution which is in-memory database. So the state of the application, which means all the clicks person has done, everything he's interacting with your website is stored on memory store. If the VM24 actually got deleted, no worries. We can just change the state transfers to other person, which is VM50. And VM50 will go back to memory store and sees where he left, right? And he will start from there. So it's a sub-millisecond response because everything happens at the memory level. It will also automatically scale, and it's a caching tier for data-intensive apps. So the Google Analytics service. So now that you have stored all the data of e-commerce, now you want to decide, okay, let's say we have 1 million customers online with us. group of customer A, how should we personalize the website so that he can end up buying more, right? Let's try to analyze that what kind of people are logging in, what age group, and what are they ending up buying, so that I can sell more to that age group, right? So that's where the portfolio of analytics service comes into Google. So we have BigQuery. It's serverless. It's a data warehouse platform. And essentially what you do is, let's say you have all the transactions done, which is on your database. You dump it on BigQuery and then run a query. Give me all the customer IDs where the purchase was Reebok shoes, right? So that, and more than equal to 2 times in last 1 year, which means if somebody is buying Reebok shoes 2 times in last 1 year, it's a high possibility that he is more towards the sports kind of guy, right? So then I can personalize the website with other things around the shoes and everything, so that he ends up buying more from us, right? So that's where BigQuery comes in. It also supports streaming data inserts. So if you have lots of IoT data coming in and you want to do a query like give me heart rate which is more than X, that's your streaming data, right? Which is coming from every device worldwide. For storage, we have a pricing 0.02 per GB per month. So essentially, you don't have to worry about server costs. So the amount of storage you consume, you pay for it, and BigQuery will answer all your queries on what you're looking at. Dataproc is a one-click big data cluster. If you heard about Hadoop, it's basically a pre-installed Hadoop cluster, and it also automatically scales out, which means it will have some slave nodes which will scale out based on your needs. It comes with pre-installed Hadoop and also Spark. If you want to run some Hadoop jobs on-premise and now want to migrate to Google, you can look at Dataproc. And basically the pricing is per second per node, and the amount of storage is stored on the system. So essentially it's using compute engine on the backend. So your price is like compute engine, and you can have 10 nodes of big data cluster, and one click it will spin up the master node and the slave node, configure master with slave. It has everything installed. It just SSH and start running your Hadoop jobs. So use case, if you want to migrate on-premise Hadoop to Dataproc, it's a good news for you. If you have Spark workloads on-premise, you can also move to Dataproc. So you can use Hadoop or Spark both on the Dataproc. Now, once you analyze, the last thing is you have to give a report to your end customer, right? So how many of you like an Excel sheet which is like 1 million rows? So we want some good chart which can show percentage of how people have been behaving. So that's why data visualization comes into play. Data Studio is a visualization tool. It will do data transformation, connect to your BigQuery and MySQL, and you have drag and drop charts. So let me show you a picture for this. So this is how you have world population on the left-hand side: China, India, United States, Indonesia, and many more. Instead of looking at these numbers, you want to see, how is the market looks like in terms of population here. You can just build up a chart like this, right? So basically, data visualization, all the analytics is done. You want to visualize, submit a nice, fancy report to your customer or the manager. Want to impress him? You can look at data visualization tool, which is Data Studio. Operation side, now that everything is deployed and running successfully, so your ecommerce.com is defined, everyone is coming online, buying the product they like, you're able to sell more because of analytics. But what if somebody tries to do something and went wrong, right? So thousands of VMs running there. So how do you do it? So that's where we have Stackdriver. So Stackdriver is basically the last part of it where you deploy entire solution and run it. Then you start monitoring it. So what if your VM CPU went 70% and above, right? So you can go ahead and get a notification and see what happened. You can add more capacity if you need, add more VMs or scale up the same hardware, right? So monitoring will help you CPU, RAM, network, memory details. Second is also it does application health check monitoring, which means it keeps pinging port 80 on your app if it's running or not running. Second is logging. So let's say you have 1,000 virtual machines and you have million customers coming to your website. So most of requests are served from different virtual machines. So how about taking all the logs of the application and storing it in centralized place? So that's where Stackdriver will help you. Debugging, it's a good debugger online where you can edit your code and fix your bugs if you need and come back. Error reporting is basically you have your 400 errors, right? 500 errors on your website. So all of this will be reported to you on your dashboard, or should you wish, you can get an email notification for it. The last is tracing. It can tell you the URL. Let's say ebay.com/anil/iphone/ whatever the web page is, right? The URL level tracing. So all of it, it can show up how much time of latency it's taking to reach out to that particular URL. In addition, one last thing is in Stackdriver, it's multi-cloud, which means it can also monitor and do logging for your VMs, which are running on Amazon Cloud. That's it. We are at the end of the session. I'll be jumping into demo. Just before we get there, we have a promo offer going on. We have slashed our price by 50% for all our courses just because of the COVID impact for all of us, right? These prices are valid till May 9 only. Later, we'll have same prices apply. We have AWS Solution Architect Associate, which is at 14,000 plus GST. We got certified Kubernetes administrator. If you're looking at Dockerizing yourself and getting into DevOps, we have DevOps advanced training, which is a 5-day course. AWS Architect is 4-day. Certified Kubernetes is also a 4-day. Chef and Ansible Automation is also a 4-day program. So the way it works is on May 9, which is Saturday, we'll start with Amazon Architect, which will be on a Saturday. And on Sunday, we'll have DevOps Advanced, right? Similarly, we have Sunday, a certified Kubernetes admin. So there'll be different trainers for different tracks. I'll be also taking one of the tracks here. So essentially, it's a weekend program. If you enroll for AWS Architect, it will be 4 Saturdays, which is 4 weekends. Same goes with certified Kubernetes. It will be 4 Sundays, which is 4 weekends. Only DevOps is a 5-day course that will be ending up with 5 Sundays. So this is valid only till May 9th batch. And you also have a referral bonus. If you refer someone and they enroll, you'll be paid 2,000 rupees referral bonus for it. You can reach out to geetanji.sharma@thecloudenable.com, and this is our phone number if you need to enroll for the class. And thank you. We have more info on our website. If you need to look at our website, there'll be course information. But the one you want to enroll, we'll send you the outline via email. So this is our training portfolio where we have cloud computing, OpenStack, Amazon Cloud, Azure, and Google Cloud. We also do DevOps training, different portfolio. This is your DevOps Advanced, which I spoke about. And we also have Machine Learning Foundation 2-day and Machine Learning Associate, which is 5-day. When you click on a particular training, it will give you the key features on number of programs, the number of days, and who should attend, the objectives of the course. And this is your course topic where you'll have all the information like day-wise with modules. And you also know where all we have lab sessions in it. And contact us, we'll give you info about us, where all we are present physically. You can visit our offices. And basically, US is just a billing office, but physical presence we have in India and Singapore, where we operate from. And this is our official email ID for any corporate inquiries to info@thecloudenable.com. Okay, so let's jump on to the demo now. I have already logged in here to Google Cloud. If you notice, it's console.cloud.google.com. And this is a project. So we have a concept of projects here. So you have to first create a project. And within each project, you have a dashboard. And this shows you that I'm using Compute Engine, 2 instances, and App Engine here. So on the left-hand side, you'll see a navigation menu where you'll see different services like Compute has App Engine, which is we can deploy an application, which is platform as a service. Compute Engine, virtual machine as a service. Kubernetes, which is container as a service, and Cloud Function. Storage, we have many things like Bigtable, data store, storage, which is your cloud storage, Cloud SQL, which we discussed about. So essentially, if you go to Cloud SQL, you can see when I create an instance, it gives the option of MySQL, Postgres, and SQL Server. When you choose a database, you can go ahead and deploy a database in few clicks. It will have everything pre-installed. So set up a name and select which version of database we want. So today we want to do demo on the compute engine, load balancer, and DNS, but just want to show you that some screenshots on other guys also. Right. So let's get started. So we go back here and go to compute engine. So I'll be creating 2 virtual machines for now, and I'll be drawing a diagram here as we speak. So essentially the demo will have, I'll be creating VM1, then VM2. And this is running a Debian Linux. Let's go back, create instance. So you provide a name. So I'll be calling it as the VM01. And this is where you select your regions, which we are talking about: Europe, Asia Pacific, and US. So I'm going to select US Central 1. And under that region, so currently in US Central 1, we have 4 AZs. But if you compare to other regions, you will see only 3, right? So at least 3 zones are always there. And here's your configuration, the machine type which I discussed. The smallest VM you can spin is F1 Micro, which is 1 CPU and 614 MB of RAM. And immediately it pops up your pricing here, just $4.28 a monthly estimate. So how it works is, it is having a cost for your CPU and RAM separate, and for the disk separately. Because the disk is your root disk, the C drive. It can be 100 gig, then the price of this storage will differ. But the price of the CPU RAM will not differ for it. So there are 2 good news for this. One, if you stop a VM, you won't be incurring this cost at all for the month. You'll be only incurring the cost of your storage. And we have a sustained use discount. If you use a VM for full month, we give you additional discount, and this is after discount here. So essentially, this is smallest. Then we have 1 CPU, 3.75 gig RAM. We also have a 96 CPU and 360 GB of RAM. The highest we can spin today is the 160 CPU configuration with 3.75 TB of RAM, which is a single virtual machine. It's quite pricey, but yes, you won't get performance at a low cost, right? This is very important if you're looking at performance here. All right, so we're gonna stick to F1 Micro for this demo. And here, when you click change, you can notice we have CentOS, different versions. You also can choose Red Hat Linux. You can also choose Ubuntu, right? So essentially, you can choose anything you like. So I'm going to stick to Ubuntu 18 here. And these are 2 types of disk, as I discussed. A single disk can be a 65 terabyte. And here I'll go with 10 GB only, right? And then you can just allow HTTP traffic and click on create. So while this VM comes up, let's spin up another VM. We're going to label it as VM02, same region. And then we have F1 Micro config. Click on change, choose an Ubuntu operating system, and choose 18.04. Allow HTTP traffic and click create. So essentially what I'm going to do is now SSH to each of the VM. So the VM1 is ready. I just click on SSH, and I'll be installing Apache Web Server on these. So between, I want everyone, I'll be posting this on chat window. Please visit the website, which is www.cloudenabled.net.in. So right now, this is a demo website. It's not up and running. So what I'm going to do is we'll go production in exactly 9 minutes. So 0 to deployment in 9 minutes. Notice here I'm visiting cloudenabled.net.in. It gives error page. So we're going to use Cloud DNS, use load balancer and the VMs which I created now. Okay, that's it. So virtual machine login is success. I'm just going to log in as root here. So apt update. I'll just update the repo and I'm going to do a apt install Apache 2, which is the web server. And then I will edit the file, which is HTML, which is, we'll edit it a little later. Let's the installation complete. Before editing, I just want to show you a few things. So if you notice, the web server is installed, and if I head back to my virtual machine IP address, so this VM, if I visit the site, it says it works. So in load balancing, how do you know whether the actual load balance is working or not? Just for a learning curve. So I'm going to edit this file and then change it to web1. So this is the path for the file, which is index.html. And go to line number 219. So that's where the word it works is. Yeah. So this guy, we're going to change him to web01. And then we head back. If I refresh, it should say I'm web01. Yeah. So similarly, now I'm going to go back to Compute Engine. I'm logging into VM number 2 and do the same process and label it as web2. So architecturally, what we have right now is we have web01 and then we got web02. So we'll log in as root, and this time I'll do an apt update and apt install Apache 2-y and vim and the path for the index.html. So right now we have two IP addresses. So this one is web1. Oh, sorry, it's not copied. And similarly, we have web2. Again, of course, if you go back to this website, it says it works. So I'm going to edit this file now in a moment. Log into VM02, go to line 219, sorry. Go back to this guy, change it to web02. So essentially, if I refresh back, it says web02 here. So we have web1 and web2. So web2 is on this IP address. So I'm going to go back to the architecture here. This was I was talking about in theory. So we cannot give individual IP address. So back to the screen. So essentially, I was talking about we are creating an external load balancer, and then we are going to attach these VMs behind this load balancer. Instead of giving each IP address of the customer, we just give a single IP to the end user. So we have a load balancer which are creating single region only. So the load balancer name, I'm just going to call it as CE load balancer. Then backend config. So this is where you select your region where your applications are running. So for us, it's of course US Central 1. And here you can select your existing instance. So we have VM01, add instance VM02. So essentially, we are backend. We are saying anybody hits this load balancer, send it to VM1 and VM2. And we have health check. I already configured it. Essentially, just to save time, it's gonna hit port 80 on each VM and keep doing a health check for it. So essentially, it will be port 80 ping just to check the application running or not. The host might be running, but app is not running, right? Could be a situation. That's why it does this. And that's it. Front-end configuration. So we're going to call it as CE front-end. This will be our load balancer IP address. We have ephemeral, means it will generate an IP address on its own. You want specific static IP also you can use. So I'm going to generate a new one, and the port will be 80, which means the front end, when the people hit from internet. So let's say we have users, and users will come on internet here. The front end is this, right? So front end is going to be port 80. That's what we are saying. So port 80 on the load balancer, and VM also listen on port 80. So now let's go back and review the rules. So it's basically two VMs. You're going to send traffic and click on create. This will take a while. Essentially, it creates a load balancer, maps to your VMs. It also generates a public IP address. do a refresh, you can notice the load balancer got created. And this is the IP address. So if I copy this IP and go to the browser tab, you can notice if the VM is ready, it starts serving the traffic from there. So it'll take around a minute or so. Let me close this other windows for now. So I'm putting this on chat window for you guys as well. You can hit this after 60 seconds from now. So some of you should see web 1, some of you should see web 2. It's going to be on the chat window. I already pasted it for you guys. Yeah, great. So notice here it's ready. So when I hit the load balancer IP, this is what we are hitting now, right? So all of us are going to hit this load balancer IP address and not individual VM IPs. And then it's going to this particular VM1. So it does caching the browser. So I'm going to take this IP, go to my other tabs. And if I go here, it says Web2. So if you notice on my different browser, it's Web2. On the Chrome, it's Web1 here. So if you are hitting, you will be seeing Web1, Web2 randomly. Let's go back to architecture. Still not a good architecture, right? We're still hitting the IP address, which we don't like. So how about we putting in a DNS name in between, right? So instead of people hitting the IP address by internet, so earlier they were hitting the IP address, right? So instead of that, we'll bring a middleman here, which is a cloud DNS. And then we'll map this DNS entry to this IP address. So what is the domain I'm going to use? It is your ce.net.in, which is cloudenabled.net.in, which I asked you to. And then you're just going to hit this particular website. So let's leave the follow. Let's go back. And under network service, we have cloud DNS. I have a domain hosted by name cloud enabled. And these are the NS records you have to update in your provider. So I have a GoDaddy account where I purchased this domain. So I updated it. I create a record set and people visit www.cloudenabled.net.in. A record, which is nothing but an IP address. I don't have patience, so we'll keep it to 1 minute of TTL. So it's quick. And then copy my load balancer IP, which is ending with 42. Remove the HTTP part of it. And click on create. So essentially we are saying if somebody looks for cloudenabled.net.in, send it to the load balancer IP, which is the architecture I drawn here now, right? And then the DNS will route it to the load balancer and the load balancer sent to either web1 or web2. So let's go back and visit the site of cloudenabled.net.in. So this will take a while, but it should come up in around 60 seconds or a minute or so maximum. So let's wait for this while this domain comes up, and then I'll open up for question and answer session. So while this comes up, let's head back to the demo part. So essentially, there are other services which you can always leverage. Like we spoke about VPC network here. So this is the default VPC. You can see 23 subnets, means one subnet per region. And you can always create a new VPC. And once you create, it will come up as a different VPC name here. So if you notice, if you want to create a new VPC, let's call it as CE VPC here. And then we select automatic. And you can notice per region, so it's getting 10.128 in US Central, For Europe, it's creating 10.132. So similarly, if you go next, it's going to all the regions here. And these are all the different firewall ports like ICMP, internal, RDP, and SSH, and click create. So this is going to create a global network in less than 90 seconds for you. So let's go back and see if my site is up. Okay, great. So if you notice, we are hitting cloud enable.net.n and it went to load balancer. Then the load balancer sent to web2 at this moment. If you try the same website from other browser, so probably it should route traffic to another one. So you can try it on your different browsers just to check out if you are able to visit the site. Yeah, so now web1 again. So that completes the session. Thank you so much for joining. If you have any requirements, you can always visit our website and reach us out on email or the phone number.